and I also work on DevOps engineers. Okay, so these are my specializations. Okay, and occasionally I also play with cloud infrastructures for managing my apps and instances all over things. Okay, so let's move into ADF. So before starting with the change in data capture, first let's try to understand what is ADF. ADF is nothing but it's a Azure Data Factory. Okay, so it's a combined software as a service, wherein which we are trying to connect with all the ingress points of the data, and we are trying to process them, perform ETL kind of loads, trying to understand and create a valuable insight over the data. So Azure has created something called as ADF for that. Okay, so our traditional way of managing data is something like we usually connect with our data through like a JDBC, OLTP. We connect with our data. Then we perform some sort of operations like ETL. We use a lot of tools. There are a lot of tools. We perform some sort of operations over them, extract the data, manage them, and then we generate valuable insights like visualization tools, charts, or something like that. Okay, so this is our traditional way of managing our data. But the problem here is nowadays, due to the increase in IoT devices, okay, we have got a lot of data. Okay, capturing all those data is a bit harder right now. So our cell phones, IoT devices, all the smart devices, all these devices generate a lot of data, starting from their logs or even the basic installation data, all these things, traffic data, all these kinds of data are creating large volumes of information. But the way how we pull these data and how we process it, it's becoming a bit tricky. Okay. So what Azure has done is like they have built a software as a service platform wherein which we are able to ingest all these kinds of data from various data services and data loads. Okay, and they provide us the platform for uh, managing these data. Like they provide us platform for extracting the data. They provide us the operations to compute it, transformations, all these kinds of things can be done on their same old node actually. So together, all these things provide us as a Azure Data Factory. Okay, so basic thing is since it's a cloud, okay, so it can be connected as a on-premise or a hybrid way. So on-premise is something like where, we will have a Arc node which will be pulling the data from the local infrastructure. Assume that you have some sort of employee data that's managed within the enterprise. We'll be pulling those kinds of data and you can directly inject it into the Azure infrastructure. And based upon whether, let's say it's a SQL, no SQL, or whatever kind of data, it's a streaming data. Based upon that, they provide connectors for downloading those data actually. And all these data are pulled using pipelines. Okay, we can build pipelines similar to our CI/CD pipelines. We have pipelines for pulling these data, and you can perform n number of transformations, operations, all these things. And they also provide SDKs, wherein which you could use Python or any other supported languages to perform these data flows. So for best example is you could use PySpark for managing these data. You can perform operations and you can later point of view after making these computations you could just display it as a dashboard, or you can store it or send it to your downstreams or your upstreams depending upon your business logics. You can also schedule how you want to run these data based upon triggers or events, whatever it is. And even you can also monitor them. Monitoring helps you to understand how to manage these data. You can also do all kind of operations based upon that. For example, in case if I want to perform any sort of load during a certain time, you can monitor them, you can trigger them manually, and in case of any failure, you will be even notification will be triggered and sent to the particular admin team. So all these operations are held and managed by Azure Data Factory. So here Cortana Analytics plays another part which we'll cover in the next slides. Okay. So basic thing about Data Factory is you can orchestrate, monitor, schedule these pipelines. you can perform all these computations on your hybrid or on multi-cloud. Okay, so let's assume that I want to pull some data from AWS or Alibaba or on Oracle cloud providers. Okay, so Azure provides you connectors using which you could download these data, or you can stream them into your data factory, and you can migrate, manage, or trigger them. All these things can be done using these data factory, and it's all handled by intelligent processes actually. So this is the basic sample. So here, if you notice towards your left, the data sources are on-premise or external data, using which you can, and the orchestration is happening here, where in which the data is ingested as a blob. So data factory plays a vital role over here because pulling these data and managing its form, converting, transformation is the bit trickiest part in managing the data. Because, for example, if I want to pull the data from let's say a SQL database, in that case, I have to fetch the right data, right object connectors, and I have to write all those scriptings. But here, Data Factory provides you with plugins, wherein which you could just click on a drag and drop, and you can connect with the type of data source that you want to do it. So let's assume that I want to download some sort of feed files. I need to connect from a server or a blob storage. I can just do it easily. Just drag and drop it, connect it, pull the data inside, and you can use Azure Synapse for data storage. And biggest of all, you also get Azure AD services, that is Active Directory, using which you can authorize or authenticate a particular user. So let's assume that my downstream require only certain kind of data to be viewed. In that case, I could just actively manage these things using the Azure Data Directory. And at the end, you can perform analysis and retrieve high insights out of the data. And you can either use Power BI or Tableau or whatever kind of software that you want to, and you can generate a visualization and get the reports accordingly. So here Cortana plays a vital role here. So what Cortana does is it manages all these data flow using its own built-in intelligence actually. So if you see here, like we are using Cortana at various stages, upon which Azure Data Factory is one of the major thing. And if you see in the middle, you could see like we are using Azure Data Lake Store, wherein which you are pulling data from across various sources and you are storing them for later purposes actually. And Azure also provides you machine learning and other kinds of applications wherein which you could run your PySpark, or you could just use your Python directly on the Azure. And even on VS Code, you have a simple plugin wherein which you could just sign up and you can just download the plugin. And instead of connecting or managing your data remotely over the web browser, you can run or write all your code over your VS Code and perform all sort of operations. So Microsoft is it's like loosely coupled with all these applications wherein you could just easily interact with the data, manage them, and use them efficiently. And again, there are n number of intelligence services which you can use. For example, cognitive analytics, even the the recent OpenAI ChatGPT, even you can use the knowledge base that's been stored under Azure Data Lake. All you need to do is just connect the data, and the data flows across the Azure Data Lake into the ChatGPT, and you can use it. Still, all these things are preview, but Microsoft team is working hard to manage all these things. Okay, and then yeah, these are the different use cases of Azure Data Factory. Okay, so a few of the examples that I could give is like I could fetch the data from customer sentiment analysis. Just I can pull the onboard data from them. I can use cognitive services within Azure to get a derived data. So Azure Data Factory is a combined tool. You get a lot of applications within it, and moving data across these platforms is very easy. You just need to drag and drop and you get your data across all these platforms. Okay, and then so what are the core components about this data factory? So here the data storage, processing, and data movement. It is the core platform here. So let's assume as per this image, we are fetching some sort of CSV files for processing. So here, if you notice, pulling these files are a bit easy, but connecting them to your services is a bit hard, right? So what we do is we have our pipelines. Using pipelines, you can write your transformation code, wherein which I just need to pull only the certain records from the CSV files. I can do that. I can copy them, create a data set, and then push it into my SQL server. So all these things are easily managed within the data factory. We'll see the key components of it. So most of these things, it can be done automatically. Okay, so transformation is bit easy, and all these things are efficient too. And biggest advantage of all these things is it's very easy to like monitor these pipelines. Okay, and moving forward, one second. Yeah. So all these things are fully managed services, and Azure Data Factory has its own compute services. They have their own compute services, management, and even the identity management protocols, wherein which you can manage the authentication and the logging. All these things are inbuilt. So here, if you see that there is a data set, and the link to service is something like let's assume that I have a SQL server wherein which I have to pull some data. Okay, so connecting to the SQL server is a bit hard. Okay, you have to write, you have to get a proper SDK or a JDBC driver installed. But here, if you see, Azure provides you connectors directly, which I'll show a quick demo on how to do it. But all these things are built, yeah, very efficiently using pipelines, and activity is something like you can manage, run operations directly on the services. Okay, so by default, these data factory provides a trigger. Okay, trigger is something like an event based. It can be an event based or a time based or an action based. So let's assume that I need to pull some data on a hourly basis. For every 1 hour, I need to pull it. Like in that case, you can set a time based trigger actually. So it will run every 1 hour. And these pipelines are something like which will help you to pull the data or send the data from your source to destination. And activities is something where you apply your transformation. So let's assume that I have some data across my tables, and I need only the certain records out of it. In that case, I could write a simple SQL query to pull the data or apply some sort of transformation depending upon the business logic, and I could just store it, manage it. I can perform all these applications over here easily. And if you closely see here, like you can see that Azure Data Factory also allows you to connect to direct HTTP protocol, wherein which I could just download or scrape some sort of data over the website, and or else I could connect with Azure Synapse services or even blobs or any sort of databases. Okay, so all these functionalities are inbuilt. You don't need to go outside actually. So to dig more into it, uh, so there are some best practices. Okay, best practices are something like you have to always keep your connections very simple. Okay, and the other thing is, since this is a new platform, most of the services that are built here are they often support the Azure ecosystem. Okay, so it's a bit easy to operate your data. So I would always advise you to like migrate or push all the data that you want into the Azure platform. Either it's SQL, NoSQL, or a blob storage. Okay, and then you can run your optimizations or transformations. Okay, but since connecting to a different cloud, it's a bit tricky over here. Okay, so monitoring and managing. So this is crucial when you run into production-based environments, wherein which often all these pipelines are triggered by some sort of actions. Okay, so all these actions can be predefined. You can define what sort of trigger you need, whether it's a Harley trigger or a event trigger, and the data can be flown across easily. So even it can also show in case of if there is an error, it will also show you the error message properly. So here we are trying to pull some sort of data from Amazon S3, and there seems to be some sort of error like the remote server did not respond properly. In that case, the error is also shown appropriately. Based upon that, the team can manage the actions effectively. Okay, and then moving on to, yeah. So another crucial thing is, so here you can see various stages of pipelines. Okay, so if you observe closely, we are pulling some sort of data from a HTTP, and then we are pulling some data from a SQL-based database, and we are managing some sort of data over here, like we are applying some sort of transformations, and the data is flown through across other stages. Okay, all these data you can easily see them as a graph. You can see how the data is being managed, how the data is being pulled, and in case if a particular data source doesn't respond properly, you can see what sort of issue it is. You could just right click over it. You can run the particular pipeline again, or even you could get some useful informations like how long the pipeline ran and did it fail recently or what sort of issues happening, and based on that you can debug it and you can continue on your flow. Okay, so this is a simple structure of understanding, a visualized structure of understanding how your data is flowing from your source to the destination. Okay, coming back to next topic. Yeah, monitoring your consumption. So this is again a crucial thing. So since Azure Data Factory is kind of a software as a service platform, it's harder to track the resource usage, right? But no need to worry. For each and every pipeline that you build, you can easily understand, observe what sort of, what sort of compute has been running, how long it has been running, and what sort of cost you would be getting at the last. So this is another added advantage within ADF. You can get all these kinds of insightful feeds, and based on that, a business can run their pipelines from dev to staging or to production. This is much useful, and it gives a lot of insights if you dig deep into this particular monitoring consumption models actually. So yeah, it also, yeah, coming back to the other services. So if you see here, this thing is tightly coupled over within the uh, Azure services. So here, if you see, like it can connect with the on-premise SQL Server, NoSQL, Azure services, within which like you can connect your storage tables, Cosmo DB, all these things. For all these things, you get a connector directly. It's much easier, and you can also connect with other sort of data formats or any other cloud providers too. But you should find the appropriate connector to fetch the data. Or else you can use some sort of generalized means of connecting. Either you can use Kafka or something like that to pull and manage these data. Okay, so that's where this data factory works. And this is the overall view about how the data factory works. But uh, let's see about the change capture. Okay, one second. Let me show how the change capture option works over here. I believe the screen is visible to everyone. So this is Azure Data Factory. Okay, so it looks something like this. So all you need to do is just click over like Azure Data Factory. You can create your own instance and then you can launch it. So I have already created it. Okay, so this is how it looks like. And if you launch it, you will get something like this. So this is how the data factory looks like. It's a platform where in which you get all the services. So if you closely observe, whatever we saw on the slides, you can see the same over here: ingestion, orchestration, transformation, and perform all sort of operations here. So if you click on author, as our topic suggests, you can see change data capture. So this is still on a preview mode. The reason why I did not speak much about this is first, everyone should understand what is Azure Data Factory and how we are capturing the data. So as I said, you can build some sort of triggers or connect to all these connectors. Okay, so here like this change data capture is something it will automatically detect the changes of data actually. So let's assume that I'm having a NoSQL database, okay, and let's assume some sort of a collection gets inserted. In that case, the pipeline should automatically be triggered to perform some sort of operation. Okay, so here what happens is this is an option provided by ADF, wherein which you could just mention your source type. Here, like just specify your name. So I'll just let's just say like CDC Azure. Okay, CDC Azure, and you could just specify all your source type. So here, if you see, it supports NoSQL, SQL, managed database instances, wherein which you could connect with all sort of databases, and it also supports files, Avro, delimited. So let's assume that I want to choose a delimited file. So what happens here is, let's assume that there is a delimited file, a CSV file, and in case if there is a change in the particular delimited file, okay, based on that a trigger will happen. Okay, so here I need to specify where am I pulling the data from. Okay, where am I going to pull this particular delimited file? So let's assume that I'm going to pull this from my source link. This is a something. This is a lake storage, Azure Lake Storage, which I created for testing. So right now I do not have any, but since it's a preview, I'm not able to run it under a sandbox environment. But uh, ideally, what happens is like if I have a data over here, okay, I'll be able to choose the file and I'll be able to continue it. And in case if there is a change in this particular text file, okay, or let's assume if it's from a NoSQL, all you need to do is just choose your database, choose your particular collection or the document, and in case if there is a change happening in that particular container, it will automatically initiate a trigger. A event trigger will automatically start. So the target type, it's asking for the target type. Let's say like it's a delimited file. I want to store it here. Just give it a second, it will load. But see, since this is on a preview stage, right now this particular option is not fully stable. But our end goal is to understand this is basically a triggering system. It will be useful whenever you're managing or streaming large volumes of data based on which a trigger can be initiated. Okay, so that's all about Azure Change Data Capture. So you are trying to capture the data which is having some sort of dynamic change. Okay, so that's all about Azure Data Factory and the change data capture over here. Once this particular feature is stable, I recommend everyone to try to build a simple database, make some changes, and try to fetch the data over here. This will automatically show the changes over here easily. Okay, so it's a easy process. Okay, so far, does anyone have any doubts so far? Hi, Dinesh. Yeah, please go ahead.
So is this similar to the CDC in normal on-prem DWH data warehousing life cycles actually?
Yeah, it's similar to that.
Hey, hi, Devakar. This is Dheeraj
Yeah.
here. Sorry,
Yes, it is.
my voice is a little messed up because of. Um, so we have a situation where the client is basically having a AS400. The entire transaction is happening on the DB2 database because AS400 has that mainframe processing where they capture all of the transaction data. So they're looking at to do a real-time replication from the AS400 to ADLS Gen 2. So do you say that
Okay.
it supports and is it ready to use, and does it support DB2 with the transactional system or not?
I would not recommend that method. Actually, you should come up with something else because Azure data lakes are going to be like they are going to depreciate it. But this one, since it's in a preview mode, I would not recommend it. Maybe you can start it as a POC, try testing it, how it would work. Uh, Once it's a stable platform, I would definitely recommend to go with it actually.
Okay.
As of now, no.
Okay. Yeah. Thanks.
Hey, Diwakar, this is Amar here.
Hey, Amar, yeah.
Hey, Diwakar. Uh, Let us say source side, there is a table and there is multiple updates or
Correct.
the change in the data is continuously happening.
Yeah.
So this CDC feature within the ADF. So whenever one transaction is happened, so will it run automatically for every 1 minute or 2 minutes like that?
So you
I mean,
can
whenever
change that.
changes is happened.
Yeah, correct. So during the trigger time, you can specifically mention that it can run upon this particular event trigger, or else run it on a timely basis. You could just say like run it every 1 minute or 5 minutes, but you have to keep in mind these triggers cost you. Okay, every time you trigger it, it is a billable thing.
Okay.
But the
So
Divakar, one quick thing, but the
Yeah.
it works based on the log file and log changes, isn't it?
Yeah.
So you're basically
So
connecting it to the respective tables log to identify the insert, update, and deletes, right?
yeah, correct. It uses transactional logs to identify all these things.
Correct. So another thing is
And
important to have that log option enabled in the database, right?
correct. Yeah, it has to be managed.
Yeah. Got it. Thanks.
Yeah. Or else you have to use some sort of streaming services wherein which you could use
Yeah, yeah.
Kafka, so which
We have
can
yeah,
Mm,
messaging architecture is different. So that's another thing. But eventually you have to have the ETL tool
correct.
to pick the data and push it from A to B, right?
Yeah,
Because messaging is just going to queue it up, your changes, and notify those queues, those message through that message, and but still eventually you have to push the data through ETL tool.
true. Yeah, correct.
Got it. Thanks.
And you have to make sure that you have the necessary connectors to do it. As
Yeah,
of now, this
having
functionality works. Yeah,
correct. Having CDC with ADF would be really interesting to know,
correct.
because ADF we've been using heavily in different clients, and if they starts provide, of course it'll be costly because they charge as we use, so it'll be a costly affair. But again, it'll be really interesting to act or implement the CDC when you already you're using the ETL tool as ADF, right?
True. Yeah,
Cool. Good to know. Thanks.
yeah, sure.
So what I want to ask you is like, sorry to take your time. The
Yeah, go ahead.
difference between on-prem and the cloud here, this Azure ADF, Azure CDC, ADF CDC. How far it is like meritorious compared to that on-prem actually? Means, there in
So,
on-prem because like when we go live only it will be more useful, am I right? CDC.
yeah. So
How
CDC
far it is
like
meritorious compared to on-prem?
okay, so CDC is something like the computation runs totally on the cloud, so it's faster, efficient.
Okay.
And the other thing you could consider is once the particular plugins are built in, you could connect with multiple clouds or multiple types of data sources. Like you could build your pipelines to fetch full data, stream them. All these things can be easily done. Since it's a basic, I mean, it's a preview.
Right.
It doesn't support much functionalities, but in future it will be a great functionality.
So you mean to say that in on-prem we cannot able to connect multiple sources?
You can, but here like it's a built-in package. It's a totally like a software as a service. It's much
Okay.
easier, convenient. Once you push all your data into the cloud, it's easier to collaborate within the services actually.
So scaling part will be a more advantage, am I right? We can
Yeah,
scale up
true.
and scale down actually.
That's totally a true. Yeah.
Thanks, Diwakar. Thanks for your clarification.
Thank you.
Participants, you can unmute yourself and you can ask your questions. Any more questions? Any more questions in the chat?
In such a situation which I just mentioned you, what is the approach would you suggest? Like I have a client here in New York, and they're basically looking at to have a real-time replication. Currently, they're doing in every 15 minutes, but they're using Python to go read data and pull it everything. It's not a delta changes. They pick everything and they process it after they pick everything in every 15 minutes. So
Okay.
they pull it on. It's an on-prem environment. They pull it using Python to SQL Server, but they're
Okay.
looking definitely to have a real-time replication. What is the architecture would you suggest, Divakar, in this situation? I've
Okay.
been suggesting let me just quickly tell you what I'm trying to suggest them, or what I've already suggested them. They already have SSIS, licensed
Okay.
SSIS, and they have SQL Server on-prem, like enterprise licenses on SQL Server. So one
Okay.
option I gave them to still have on-prem environment and can use PDC option with SSIS. I'm not sure
Okay.
uh, how better architecture it would be. And second option I gave them to use the cloud, of course Azure, using Event Hub or Kafka,
Mhm.
combination of both, and then use
Mhm.
the SSIS to pull the data so that they can have the hybrid approach of having, so that they should not be losing all of the enterprise, which they have put
Okay.
recently, like around $3 million in there. What would
Yeah.
you suggest have that in this situation?
Okay. So what you said initially would be a great approach. But let's assume if you are having multiple services running all together, in that case, I would recommend you to use Azure Arc, which will connect your on-prem and your cloud infrastructure, and you could just stream your data directly into the cloud and do all sort of computations here. So that would be a
Arc,
better way.
that
Yeah,
is Azure
Azure
Arc.
Arc. Yeah.
Can you tell me what it is? I've never used Azure Arc.
Okay, Azure Arc is something like it helps you to connect with your local on-prem and your cloud services easily, actually.
Oh, I see.
Yeah,
Is this
you can use that.
just for the connectivity, or it has the capability of reading data and replicating?
It is for connectivity. It connects your services mutually. It helps you to transfer data easily. It's kind of like how do I say? It helps you to manage the services easily.
I see. Okay.
So that would be great. And yeah, like you could use some sort of services like that. That would be the better way. You could just onboard all your data, because ingestion, like since you are using Python, like it's kind of like a delta load, right? You are going to like pull some sort of data, you are going to read it again, you are going to ingest it into a SQL server. That's going to take a while, depending upon your data load. Maybe since you are not getting much of a data input, it's not going to be a big deal. But imagine that you are going to have hundreds of writes within a minute. In that case, ingestion is not going to help. You have to use some sort of replication scenarios.
And I'm also thinking of implementing a zonal architecture on data lake side.
Yeah, that would be great. That is a great functionality. Data replication would help you a lot actually in that functionality.
Thanks, Devaka.
Yeah,
I'm
sure.
trying to get the gist about it, whether I'm going in the right direction or not.
Yeah,
Thanks.
yeah, you are doing good. Yeah, thank you.
So participants, any more questions? So let me share the secret code for claiming the certificates. So participants, The secret code is IDRWMR. IDRWMR. Already it is shared in the chart. So you can provide the secret code for downloading the certificate or claiming the certificate. So any more questions from audience? So Divagar, I hope we can end the session.
Yeah, sure. Thanks, everyone.
Yeah.
Great day.
So on behalf of Multi-Cloud for You, we'd like to thank Divagar for delivering an excellent session on change data capture in ADF. Thank you once again.
Thank you.